Let me tell you about my favorite part of Pokemon Gold and Silver. After getting all of the gym badges, working your way through the Elite Four, defeating Lance, and finally becoming Pokemon Champion, the game pretty explicitly tells you that you've reached the end of your journey. However, this is not the case. By continuing the game, you can find your way onto a ship that takes you all the way to the neighboring land of Kanto, the setting of the original Pokemon Red, Blue, and Yellow. Getting to travel around and see how these towns have changed in the 3-year span between each game's story is my favorite thing about the second generation Pokemon games. That's right, I'm one of those over-nostalgic, original 150 only losers. Revisiting these old locations offered an exciting musical opportunity for the game's sound team as well. A lot of the original game's classic themes make a return here in new arrangements, and it's very cool to see how the changes to each location is reflected by the music. It's also interesting to compare the style of the original game's composer, Junichi Masuda, with that of the composer who did most of these rearrangements, Go Ichinose. Ichinose's distinct composing style shines through on any track that he touches, and you can tell that he had a lot of fun with some of these rearrangements. Pewter City's theme is a perfect example of this. In the original theme, we can see the elements of Masuda's arranging that we see throughout Red and Blue's whole soundtrack. Similar to the NES, the Game Boy's sound chip was made up of 2 pulse wave channels, a DPCM channel, and a noise channel, meaning that the sound chip could only ever produce 3 notes at one time. In the first generation Pokemon games, Masuda overwhelmingly used the wave channel for repeating ostinato figures, which would provide a rhythmic backbone for the tune, changing slightly throughout to adapt to the tune's chord progression. Layered over top of this would be the 2 pulse wave channels, one playing the melody way up high and the other either harmonizing the melody or providing a counterline. The range of these tunes was extremely high, with the lowest note of any given piece likely to hover around middle C, and the way these voices were layered gave the soundtrack a dense, almost contrapuntal sound, which you can hear here. With this setup, complicated harmony is pretty much out of the question, as each voice is primarily concerned with creating a satisfying line on its own. This means that throughout the soundtrack, a large portion of the harmony is made up of extremely basic exchanges of 1 and 5 chords, with any more complicated harmonic moves only being able to be vaguely hinted at. The interest in this soundtrack isn't being generated by the harmonic movement, but by each of these super strong melodies and the way that they interact with each other as they layer together. Looking at Gold and Silver's take on the Pewter City theme, we can hear how the arranging style has shifted between the 2 games. While we still have the same 3-note limitation to work with, the arrangements now tend to use each voice completely differently. Our melody is now supported with a counterline that focuses primarily on clearly expressing the tune's chord progression. A chord progression which is now grounded by a bass line low enough to actually make it into the bass clef. We also see Ichinose's sense of humor with his arrangements, like how he turns Pewter City's theme into a smooth bossa nova tune. While we lost the original tune's layered, semi-contrapuntal appeal, we gained the ability to express more intricate harmonic ideas. The original's vague exchange of 1 to 5 to 1 has been reharmonized with this much more detailed chord progression. Our 1 chord now moves to our 2 chord by way of this chromatic leading diminished chord. Then we get the simple 4-5-1 resolution before this big shot on our 2 minor 7 chord sets up a repetition of the section. Longer chord progressions and leading tone diminished chords like this are hallmarks of Ichinose's style, and with these simple changes, the same melody that we heard in the first generation games takes on a whole new color. Besides playing with different genres in these rearrangements, Ichinose also takes the opportunity to express musically how much has changed since your first trek through the Kanto region. When you first encounter the Viridian Forest in Pokemon Red and Blue, you probably don't have much more than your starter Pokemon and maybe a Rattata or Pidgey for protection. And this dark maze of creepy bugs and overly confrontational trainers marks your first foray as a trainer into the wild, dangerous world of Pokemon. The music emphasizes this feeling of stepping into the big, scary world with these sharp staccato stabs that sort of remind me of Psycho's shower scene music. With intent to distress, these dissonant tritone leaps and flat ninth intervals rob the listener of any tonal stability. When you return to Viridian Forest in gold and silver, you do so not as some scrub clutching his first caught Rattata, but as the reigning Pokemon champion going for a victory lap. Ichinose rearrangement starts the same way as the original, with these stabbing staccato notes leaping up a tritone before a new bass part brings in a completely new upbeat reharmonization. This gives way into an entirely new, much cheerier melody, and beyond the first two bars of this intro, there's actually not much that gets borrowed from the original Viridian Forest music. Even so, just these first two bars are enough to send you right back to your first time playing Pokemon, and pulling the rug out from under you by reharmonizing this tritone leap as a leading tone diminished chord resolving to the 4 chord is a brilliant way to completely take away its edge. Something similar happens when you revisit Lavender Town, home of the infamous Pokemon cemetery Pokemon Tower. In the original games, this sharp, solitary line opens up the piece and immediately sets a creepy mood. The Game Boy sound chip isn't exactly easy to listen to in this piercingly high range, and rounding off each measure with a tritone leap ensures a certain level of discomfort. It's when the other voices come in, though, that I think this piece really shows its genius. The bottom voice asserts that we're in the key of C, and with this context, the intro's ostinato figure might suggest some kind of C Lydian sound outlining the root, 5th, major 7th, and sharp 4th of the key. You can definitely analyze it this way, but I think Junichi Masuda was probably thinking more in terms of how he could create unexpected dissonance. Whereas saying something evokes a Lydian sound, to me at least, implies sort of big, lush chords with this sharp color of the sharp 11th supported by lots of other, less dissonant notes, these sparse voices evoke a very different musical quality. Every other bar of the melody is hammering on either the sharp 4th or the flat 2nd, arguably the two most dissonant chord tones to use in a major key, with the flat 2nd especially coming as a surprise to those unfamiliar with the tune. The end of the melody finally resolves to the tonic, at which point the counterline drops down to the 7th an octave below, creating this crunchy flat 9th interval between the two voices. Thanks to Masuda chasing these dissonances, the tune perfectly embodies a feeling of unease. Especially when contrasted with the rest of the soundtrack's upbeat, simple, major key pieces, this tune stands out as being especially eerie. Ichinose fools us yet again when we find ourselves back at Lavender Town in gold and silver. The same repeated high-pitched figure starts off this arrangement and immediately triggers PTSD in whoever is playing the game. As we pick up into the melody, though, we feel a complete shift. The melody is completely altered, with these emphasized sharp 4ths replaced with our major 3rd, the F sharp in the 3rd bar replaced with an F natural to fit nicely into our C major key, and this dissonant flat 2nd note recontextualized as being part of a leading tone E diminished 7 chord that resolves immediately to our 4 chord F. What's more, a new second melodic phrase comes in to answer the first, and the creepy high-pitched line is shifted to outline a new, sweet little chord progression that gets mirrored in the bass line. I find altering the melody to fit into a normal C major scale hilarious, but I'm glad that he kept the flat second in the melody and just reharmonized it to take away its teeth, since it was such an iconic part of the original tune. Lavender Town just isn't the same haunted Pokemon morgue that it once was. Pokemon Tower has been replaced with a radio tower, and now you couldn't find a deadly ghost here if you tried. The eerie feeling of the original has been replaced with an overwhelming sense of nostalgia. And this is where these Kanto rearrangements really shine, I think, giving the player a sincere, nostalgic background to what is already an extremely nostalgic experience to those of us who are there for the first games. A perfect example of how Ichinose capitalizes on this is when you get off the SS Aqua and take your first steps into Kanto, as you're greeted with this sweet and slow rendition of Vermillion City's theme. The original theme is a very short, very simple backdrop to the small port town that sets an adventurous mood in Junichi Masuda's classic style. Doesn't stand out too much, clocking in at 12 bars in length, using 2 chords and 2 real melodic ideas, but when returning to Vermillion City in gold and silver as the first Kanto town you set foot in, Go Ichinose's arrangement gives the simple melody a whole new life. As I mentioned previously, the situation in the game is already nostalgic for those of us who had played the first generation Pokemon games, but the music capitalizes on this nostalgic feeling in a few key ways, using the original melody completely unaltered and changing the elements around it, like tempo and harmony, reflects how we're revisiting a familiar place under new circumstances. Slowing down the tempo and trading in the original driving 8th note ostinato for this slow, melodic bass line brings a quietness to the arrangement. And of course, the delicate reharmonization is just beautiful. These inverted triads walking down with the melody sound lovely, and following them up with a minor 4 chord gives it just the right amount of bittersweetness. Listening to Ichinose's arrangements back to back with Masuda's originals, I'm struck by how inventive Ichinose is. When the original tunes are so well composed and so iconic, rearranging them can be a daunting task. What makes these rearrangements so successful is that each tune is adapted not only to fit in perfectly with Gold and Silver's musical identity, but also to fit an entirely new emotional context that the player is going to encounter them in. Each arrangement feels like it was composed with a single, deliberate goal in mind, and that clarity of vision is a very powerful thing. Okay, now I have some exciting announcements to make. First, I'm going to be at VGMCon in Minneapolis at the end of the month, hosting a bunch of panels talking about music theory and video games and the sort of stuff that you would expect me to be talking about. If you're in the area, come by and hang out. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. Also, I'm now selling 8-Bit Music Theory t-shirts on Bandcamp. They have my little keyboard intro thing on them with note-accurate voicings for each chord. You can wear them to church, you can wear them to lunch, you can wear them to bed. My wife says they're great. I'll put a link in the description. As always, you can find me on Patreon here if you like the channel and want to help support it. And you can always find me on Twitter at 8-Bit Music Theory if you hate the channel and want to tell me to my face. Links for all this stuff is in the description below, of course. I think that is it. So thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.